In this video, I'm going to talk about why the collarbone is the most easily fractured bone and most commonly fractured bone in the human body. And we'll look at it through a 3D anatomy in motion perspective. So that's going to be fun. And guess what? Hey, fun news. This week, I will be launching a shoulder anatomy of motion course on the bones and joints and some of the biomechanics of the shoulder. So look for that this week. It's going to launch. I'm just editing it and putting the final touches on it. It's all filmed, ready to go. So stay tuned for that. In the meantime, if you want to get a jump start on some of the basics, go to my website now and sign up for the All Access Pass, and then you'll have access to the Anatomy ABCs course, my full functional movement anatomy course, and then when the shoulder anatomy course drops, you already have access to it. That's the best way to get access to everything I have available now and everything that is coming up. Okay, let's check out the collarbone. Hey, real quick, my name is Anthony Davis. This is Shapeshift Wellness, where we explore the science of fitness, yoga, and meditation. If you like that sort of thing, please subscribe to my channel. Share this video with your friends. They might like it too. Now let's learn about the collarbone. Okay, so here we have an anatomy model in the Complete Anatomy app by 3D for Medical. So if you want to check out this app, it's pretty cool. Here's the clavicle. And what we're going to see is that this is really important. So basically, I want to make a distinction real quick so that you understand some terms. So if we look at the axial skeleton is all this stuff, okay? The rest of it is the appendicular skeleton. So that's the axial skeleton. So that means the appendicular skeleton is all of this. So appendicular meaning appendage, so your limbs, basically. So where your limbs connect with the more central part of your body, which is known as the axial skeleton, we have to be able to transmit force from the hands into basically the rest of the body, right? So you could imagine that if the arm is outstretched and you land on the arm, then you have a bunch of force here in the hand, and that force has to go somewhere. So that force goes up into the arm and then into the shoulder, and then it has to go into basically the spine somewhere. And then let's say if you were, and then that's basically gravity that's pulling it, you have to stop yourself. You have to stop the momentum of your torso and the rest of your body using your hand if you landed on an outstretched hand. So somewhere in there, if you land improperly, you don't roll, for example, or your bones just aren't strong enough to handle it, something might break. And most often it's the collarbone. And the reason is because the only fixed point that let's clear this. The only fixed point that your appendicular skeleton has a bone, a bony connection, a synovial joint, a true synovial joint with your axial skeleton is right here at the sternoclavicular joint. That's the only bony attachment. So all the force from landing with an outstretched arm here gets transmitted here, and then up into that SC joint. And the last bone along that pathway, the bone that has to really take the brunt of that force and have some stopping force, is that collarbone. The same would be true, of course, if you landed on your shoulder out here, or you were playing contact sports and you got checked in the shoulder. All that force goes in here and transmits through that collarbone into the SC joint, where it hits a hard stop, it hits a hard wall, and therefore that last bone in that chain gets bent and breaks. Okay, that's basically what happens. Now let's look at that so you actually see the anatomy. So if we look at the collarbone, we see this SC joint is right here. Basically, it's formed at the end where the proximal end of the clavicle meets in with the sternum, technically the manubrium, but basically we'll just call the whole breastbone the sternum for our purposes. So this joint is the sternoclavicular joint. And so all the force that comes in through, landing on your side goes in here, travels along the collarbone, and then hits a hard stop right there. And so something along there breaks. And that's where we have the most fractures in the human body, is the clavicle. So let's actually look at some motion now. Here is motion. This is just the arm reaching forward and up into flexion of the glenohumeral joint. And I want you to see how the collarbone and the scapula kind of move. And I want you to notice that the scapula, the shoulder blade, is just sort of floating there over the ribs. And as a result, the force doesn't really get transmitted through the scapula because your muscles just aren't going to be strong enough typically to bear the brunt of that force. So the only actual bony attachment is, you notice where the proximal or the close end of the collarbone fits into the sternum at that SC joint that we just pointed out, that point remains fixed in place. Everything else moves because everything else is just floating over this convex surface of the ribs. It's like a big inverted bowl of the ribs, and everything else is just floating there. So the only point that is actually fixed in place, at least as fixed as you can expect from a typical synovial joint, is at the SC joint. So because the scapula floats, you don't tend to see, like a fracture of the scapula or a fracture of the ribs underneath the scapula. Although you can have like a Bankart lesion or a Hill-Sachs deformity as well in the glenoid fossa, if I'm remembering that correctly. So you can have that happen. You can have fractures there, but it is not as likely as a long bone. The other reason that it is more likely to fracture the collarbone is not just because of that, but because it's a long bone, and so long bones are easy to fracture. Like if you have a stick, the longer and thinner the stick is, the easier it is to break that stick if you have a twig or something like that. But if you have a short and fat log, you're not going to break that log, right? Same thing, the collarbone is long and skinny, and it is bendy as well. It's even bent, so it's easier to fracture it for that reason. So what can you do about it? Well, other than this just being a fun fact that helps to teach you a little bit about anatomy and how people get injured and that kind of stuff, well, you can learn how to fall. You take up Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, take up judo, and learn how to fall. Learn from the parkour community and the movement communities on how to fall. And this is a valid thing to be training. This is a valid practice for physical exercise. In fact, I'm not aware of any studies, but now I'm curious. I might try and look this up. I wonder if there are studies where people have looked at training people on how to fall and then look at their injury rates after they have trained on how to fall, and see if we can actually reduce falling type injury, fractures and that type of thing. FOOSH injuries, falling with an outstretched arm. And that would be really interesting because I think it makes logical sense that the more you train it. So it is a skill. You can get better at it, and there are lots of systems in place to teach you that. And just one last little fun fact, just so that you don't think that falling with an outstretched arm is just going to break your collarbone. I just want you to understand that FOOSH injuries can happen really anywhere along the hand, the wrist, the radius, the styloid, the scaphoid. Why did I say? Yeah, the scaphoid, which is one of your carpal bones. All these things. There are many types of, in a kid, you might have a torus fracture of the radius at the distal end. There are lots of different types of fractures, and yeah, a lot of them are in the wrist, or some of them are in the elbow, some of them are in the shoulder. But the most common is the collarbone for the reasons explained. So I just didn't want you to think that it's just the collarbone that's going to break, because there's a whole, world of possibilities. This is just the most likely one. Cool. I hope you gained something out of this video. If you did, please consider subscribing to my channel. And again, consider sharing with your friends. They might like it too. Anyway, I'll see you in future videos. And please watch out for the shoulder anatomy course, where we go into a lot greater depth of shoulder anatomy and biomechanics. That is launching this week. I'm super excited. I promised this to you a long time ago, so I'm finally delivering on it. Sorry for the wait, but it is going to be worth it. It's going to be a very good course. You will enjoy it, I promise. So get in there with the all access pass now, and then get caught up. That way you can really just rock it with the shoulder course. Cool? Peace.